Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're glad to have you here with us today. I'm just about to get started. Okay. Great. I see some folks checking in, saying hi on the chat, letting us know where you're from. My name is Leah Watkins, and my pronouns are she and her. And I'm a member of the collaborative network to End Exploitation, who have organized this webinar series called Do No Harm, a fresh perspective on human trafficking. You are joining us from places across Turtle Island. I am located in Takaranto, and that's where the collaborative network is. Takaranto has been home to many nations since time immemorial. These include the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. These nations were irrevocably harmed by the arrival of European settlers who have systematically tried to erase these Indigenous communities and their teachings. In our ongoing journey towards reconciliation, we are relearning the history of this country and this land, critically examining the ways we have benefited from systemic racism. We are committed to addressing these harms. So thank you for joining us today, once again, those of you who are continuing to connect. Although this series has been commissioned by Collaborative Network to End Exploitation, and it is funded by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Toronto, all of the presenters are representing their own individual views. You will be muted for the presentation portion, and we'll be turning the chat. The chat will be on at times because our speaker will be asking some questions and looking for your responses. And we may turn it off at other times just to avoid it distracting folks too much. We are recording this right now. You will have access to the recording later. I'll drop a link in the chat shortly, which is a link to all of the recordings of our previous webinars. There are captions available. They can be turned on at any time. If you look at your ribbon at the bottom of your screen, you can click on closed caption and turn our captions on. So Do No Harm is a webinar series where we are looking at some of the ways that anti-human trafficking work has inadvertently created harm to the communities that we are trying to serve, as well as to other affected communities. So today we are on part 5, Beyond Inclusion, Survivor Leadership and Empowerment with Rhonelle Bruder. But you can go back and check out the other sessions that you may have missed, and we hope that you'll come back, use the same Zoom link next week to join us when we talk about Indigenous voices and perspectives on human trafficking. As we get started, we have a few assumptions. We're assuming that you are already familiar with the topic of human trafficking. You're aware of what some of that work entails. You're here with good intentions because you want to learn more, and you understand that discomfort is going to be a part of that growth. Here we have a quote from Maya Angelou. She says, "Do the best that you can until you know better, and then when you know better, you can do better." So we assume that everybody who is on this webinar today is doing the best that they can, and we're excited to have Rhonelle share some new ideas with you so that you'll be able to go forth and do better. So this is our speaker for today, Rhonelle Bruder. I'm really excited to have her here with us today. She's been a part of the idea of this series right from the very beginning. Rhonelle is an academic, educator, and activist. She will begin her first year of her doctoral studies this fall in social and behavioral sciences at Dalalana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Her research interests include gender violence prevention methodologies and community-based recovery and resiliency for survivors of human trafficking. Rhonelle is also the founder and executive director of Project iRISE, a community-based anti-trafficking agency with a mission to educate and empower survivors of trafficking and those at risk. She is an independent consultant, trainer, and speaker on human trafficking, gender violence, resiliency, and leadership development. Her What is Sex Trafficking educational tool provides an overview of how sex trafficking works and how victims are targeted and then groomed. And it is now used by law enforcement, child welfare services, and the hospitality industry across Canada as part of their anti-trafficking curriculum. Rhonelle, thanks so much for joining us here today. So happy to have you. I'm going to turn my camera off and pass the floor over to you.
I've been on Zoom for how long and I still always forget to unmic myself. Hello, hi everybody. Thank you guys for coming today. Thank you to the Collaborative Network and Exploitation for putting on this web series. And if you haven't already, please go and watch the other previous web series. I myself have learned quite a bit on them. They're very, very informative. I believe there's still one more, and that'll be Melissa Compton talking about anti-trafficking work in the Indigenous community. So please make sure you watch all of these. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. So let me know if you guys all can see my screen. Okay, I'm assuming that's a yes. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about anti-human trafficking work and survivors of trafficking. So how have survivors been engaged in this work historically, and how should they be engaged moving forward? So the title, Beyond Inclusion, Survivor Leadership and Empowerment, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We need to go beyond including survivors in anti-trafficking and moving towards empowering them to be leaders in this movement. So Leah, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. So I'm not really going to say much more about myself. I'll just say that I'm a survivor, I'm an activist, and I'm also a scholar. So the work I do within the anti-trafficking space is informed by lived experience, by professional expertise, and now through academia, and really wanting to be able to bring new knowledge into this space and really create more evidence-based practices. So that's enough about me. So let's get to the presentation. Okay. So survivors provide a unique insight. One second, sorry, I'm staring at my face here. Survivors provide insight that can improve anti-trafficking efforts by expanding perspectives and knowledge available for intervention, policymaking, and research. I think we all can agree that survivors of trafficking have a unique expertise that can be included, but also should be a part of all anti-trafficking work. And in Canada, I would say in the last decade, we've seen an increase, exponential increase in the awareness and the education and the services for survivors of trafficking, victims of trafficking. And that has really been led by and defined by some amazing survivor leaders. So I'm just going to give a couple shout outs. So we have Jennifer Richardson, we have Tamaya Nagy, Cassandra Diamond, Bridget Perrier. These are women survivor leaders, have really built the foundation in our country. And there's many, many more. So I know I'm excluding a bunch of you guys out there, so I apologize. But the point is, they've laid that groundwork, but we need to do a lot more to really take it to that next level and really bring to a point of survivor leadership. There's a lot more work that we have to do. And that's really what this presentation is about. So, survivor inclusion. Let's think about how we have engaged survivors thus far in the anti-trafficking movement. And when I'm talking about this presentation, I want to just make it clear. I'm not saying that every single survivor in this space has had these experiences, because that's not true. We know that. We know that there are certain survivors that are able to lead their own nonprofits, myself included, that are called upon for many different opportunities. So I'm not referring to those. I'm referring to the majority of survivors in this space that have been thus far mostly excluded. And if they are included, it's in ways that are oftentimes problematic. So I just want to set that. Survivor inclusion. So I would think we all can agree that survivors thus far mostly have been included to share their story, right? If you're a survivor of trafficking, you're working with an agency, or maybe you're just even working independently, you're sharing your story. And we know that storytelling is a powerful, powerful tool. It's helpful, particularly in this space, because it takes something that is so complicated, so complex, and it humanizes it. It allows people in the general public who know nothing about trafficking to understand how something so horrific can happen, how it happens, and how to best support this community. So I'm not opposed at all to sharing your story. In fact, I love storytelling, and I'm a huge believer in storytelling. And I think Ms. Maya Angelou says it perfectly. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. Being able to share your story to the world, being able to take your experiences and use that for the betterment of society to help educate and support other young people, it's powerful. It's an incredibly powerful tool. However, storytelling and survivors sharing their stories can also be problematic. It can be triggering, it can be re-traumatizing, and it can be exploitive. And that is what we have to avoid. That is what we do not want to do when we're engaging with survivors. And so to do that, to not exploit and re-trigger people, we have to make sure that we're using ethical storytelling practices. And so how do you do that? How do you tell a story in a way that's ethical? And particularly if you are an agency, if you're working with a survivor and say you want to hire them to share their story, maybe it's a fundraiser, maybe you're doing education and training. How can you do that in a way that is not going to cause more harm? So here's some questions to ask yourself. Do you have the person's consent to tell their story? For what purpose and in what medium? So are they comfortable with you telling the story? And in which ways can you tell it? Someone may consent for you to tell their story once, but that doesn't mean they want that same story told over and over and used as an example going forward. So you have to make sure you have their permission and you have their consent. Who was the protagonist of the story? The person or the organization? Who was empowered and who is disempowered? I think this, to me, is probably one of the most important points here, is when someone, a survivor, is sharing their story, they are the only protagonist in that story. Not the agency, not law enforcement, not a social service provider, no one else the protagonist in someone else's story. Yes, you can be supportive. Yes, if the agency helped the survivor, provided them services, of course, that's part of their journey, but they are the protagonist in their own story. Are you telling the story in a way that reinforces harmful stereotypes or stigmas about a social issue or people who are affected by it? So when we're sharing stories, are we cherry picking stories that feed into a certain narrative? Are we reinforcing certain stereotypes of who is a victim, who is a trafficker, and what this looks like, or even how trafficking looks? Are we avoiding stories that don't necessarily fall into that model? You have to be careful for that. And that can happen sometimes, again, like many of these things, unintended. And then lastly, what will happen to the person after they tell their story in this way? Could it cause them harm? Are you going to continue to help them, have a relationship with them? Or as soon as it's done, okay, thank you for sharing your story, goodbye. This is really important because you're asking somebody to go in public, let's talk in a public speaking format, and share the most intimate, private, traumatic experience of their life to complete strangers. How would you feel if you did that? Just ask yourself, how would you feel if you had to share your innermost secret to a room full of strangers? Something maybe you would take to your grave. It's not easy. And so we have to remember that when we're asking survivors to share their story, are we providing them support afterwards? And not to say that everyone's going to need that, because everyone is different, everyone's different place in their journey, and everyone has different coping strategies and a support circle. But ensuring that you're offering that support is key, and making sure that is available if they need someone to talk to, or if they just want to debrief. This is really, really important because, again, people are sharing their stories of trauma, and that can be re-traumatizing and triggering. So we need to be offering as much support as possible. And if we cannot do this, then we shouldn't asking people to share their stories. So how else are survivors engaged in anti-trafficking work? Primarily, again, through storytelling, but public speaking is only one way that you can share your story. Another way is the media, right? Stories. I've shared my story to the media on multiple different platforms, and many survivors I know have. But I want us all to just look at this title for a second. Girl who says she was raped 43,000 times dedicates her life to helping others. I'm going to tell you right away, I'm triggered by this. I'm triggered, I'm upset, and this breaks my heart. There's absolutely no reason to write a heading on a story that says this language. There's no reason. The only reason this is done is because it's sensational. You want to grab attention. It's clickbait, something like that, right? This is not trauma informed. This is not thinking about the well-being of this survivor. And yes, I don't know her personally, and maybe she did agree and she okayed that heading and she was comfortable with that today. But she's a very young woman. And I don't know how she's going to feel in 5 years or in 10 years about having that anytime someone Googles her name, that title will come up. But it's not just this. I mean, I did a little research online. This is very common when talking about survivors of trafficking. So, sold into sex slavery, a survivor shares her story. Human trafficking survivors share how homelessness leads to sexual exploitation. I thought I was going to die. Ontario survivor of trafficking speaks out. Again, leading with trauma, leading with pain. And I know that that's the way the media works. I mean, I've heard that a million times, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it's the way it has to work. And if you're working with survivor and you're asking them to share their story on your behalf, or you're working with them, you have every right to demand that the media not use exploitive language like this in sharing their story to the public. And the reason why I know we have the right to demand it, I mean, not only because I've done it myself, but because when talking about other survivors of other types of issues, it's totally different. The media, in fact, will tell the story a completely different way. Like this. 4 inspiring cancer survivors who are revolutionizing health. Inspiring stories from cancer survivors. So you see, we have people, women who have survived something horrific. And any of you know, if you've known a loved one who's had cancer or lost loved ones who have cancer as I had, you know how horrific cancer is. The chemo, the weight loss, the meds, it is a brutal disease. But when I read this title, I'm inspired. I want to hear these women's stories. They're smiling, they're happy, they're healthy. I want to be these women. Because instead of focusing on the pain, the trauma of their diagnosis and overcoming cancer, they're focusing on their resiliency. They're inspiring to our community. So if we can do it for cancer survivors, why can't we do it for survivors of human trafficking? So let's go back to this story, right? Girl who says she was raped 43,000 times dedicates her life to helping others. But we can do this. We can tell the same story, have the same impact and the same message without exploiting somebody. It's actually quite easy. Courageous survivor of trafficking dedicates her life to helping others. You see, it's that simple. Now, instead, this is a story of a survivor, a thriver, a resilient young woman who overcame something horrific and is giving back to her community. We're working with survivors and they're sharing their stories. This is how we should tell stories of survivors of human trafficking, not using exploitive language and sensational imagery. Instead, focus on their strengths, focus on empowerment. So speaking of survivor empowerment, I was talking before about how survivors have been primarily included in the anti-trafficking space, having their stories told, sharing their stories. But, and I said before, storytelling can be quite powerful and impactful if done correctly and if done ethically. But how can we empower survivors of human trafficking? This is where this next part is going to focus on. But before we talk about how we can empower, let's talk about what we should not do, because this, again, presentation is a do no harm. So what are those unintended consequences that come from sometimes doing things that we didn't know were harmful? Well, let's talk about the savior complex. A state of mind in which an individual believes they're responsible for saving or assisting others. And I love this image because I think, this embodies everything when you think of the savior complex. A young woman, she looks like she's falling off the cliff and he's reaching out to help her, to pull her back to safety. And listen, everybody wants to be that person. When we see anyone that's vulnerable, that's hurt, we want to save them. That's just it's instinctual. It's a human thing to want to do. There's nothing wrong with wanting to help, but helping and saving is a different thing, particularly when we move into the savior complex. It actually can be quite problematic. So when you're talking about survivors, how can that be potentially dangerous to survivors? It encourages codependency. So you can't teach someone to be independent if they're dependent upon you, right? They need to learn how to develop all those skills for themselves. That's how you become empowered. That's how you become independent, because you're not always going to be there, particularly if you're an agency or a service provider. At some point in time, your relationship with them will most likely end. They have the rest of their lives to live. They need to develop those skills and those tools of resiliency to be able to do that effectively. Also, it does not allow other individual to take responsibility for their own actions. So my dad used to say, sometimes it's good to fall. It's good to fall and have no one to catch you, because guess what happens? You have to figure it out yourself. You got to dust yourself up and get back up again. You can't always have someone there to catch you in life. Sometimes you have to fall. You have to make the mistakes. Failure is important sometimes, because that's how we learn. And it constricts development of internal motivation. If you're leading someone, if you're saving them and saving their life, then what's happening? They're just following along you and your path and your idea of their life. Where's their autonomy? Where's their agency to decide how they want to live their life? And I'll actually go one step further. I actually think it's even more harmful when you try to save somebody, because what it tells them is that you don't even believe in them. You don't have enough belief in their ability to do for themselves, that you have to do it. So saving somebody is not helping them. In the long run, you're hurting them. I'm not talking about helping. Everyone needs help. We're a society, we're human beings. We need to help and support each other, but nobody benefits from being saved. People have to learn to save themselves. So this is also actually can be quite dangerous to the person who's trying to be the savior, of course, right? Because you're sacrificing your own needs for others. You're working 80-hour work weeks. You're taking calls at 2, 3 in the morning. Your relationships are being destroyed. All these things are happening because, again, you're trying to save somebody. You're avoiding your own issues in your life and your own problems. Of course, it can be physically, emotionally depleting, burnout, vicarious trauma. If you're working with survivors, you want to be there the long haul. You want to be that rock solid support system. You can't do it if you're burnt out and you're tired. So don't try to save anybody. Give them the tools and the support so they can save themselves. Okay, so what else do we have to be careful of? Disempowering practices. So these are practices that, again, not intended to do harm, but can. Tokenism. This is when we engage with survivors, oftentimes after the work is done. So after the curriculum has been developed, after the report has been done, and we ask them to come and join. But really, we don't want their opinion. We just need a checkbox to say, this was survivor informed. That's not empowering. The single narrative. We rely on the same survivors to provide insight and give them opportunities. So there's a lot of survivors. There's a diverse group of survivors in Ontario, throughout Canada, in the world. But oftentimes we rely on the same 4, 5, 6 women to speak for everybody. Not only is that not fair, just to the other people who obviously want to have a voice and should have a voice, but it puts undue pressure on those survivors. I cannot speak for everybody. I'm one person, I'm a Black woman, I'm a survivor, but I can't speak for every Black woman. I can't speak for every Black survivor of trafficking, nor should I, nor do I want to. So it's important that we engage with as many survivors, diverse backgrounds, to really understand this issue and if we really want to solve it. And then lastly, compensation. Pay survivors for their expertise. Okay, and I say this all the time. Nobody works for free. You don't work for free. No one works for free. If you do, it's called volunteering. So if you want someone to volunteer, then you tell them you want them to volunteer. Otherwise, you pay people, because that's how this world works. Everyone gets paid. When you're working, when you're doing a presentation, when you're on a panel, you're being paid because you're probably a salaried employee. So if we're going to be engaging with survivors, they should be compensated fairly. And this is not hard to do. It's not challenging. When you're writing your grants, when you're figuring out your budget, put in a line item for survivor consultation. How can we empower people if we don't even value them enough to pay them for their work? Right? So I know this happens a lot. It's happened to me. So I'm talking about my own personal experience too. But as a whole, as a community, we have to move away from having survivors do free work. Okay, so these are some of the disempowering practices I was talking about, but how can we actually empower survivors? Because there are ways we can do this. And this presentation is about giving you guys tangible tools that you can use moving forward. So become an ally. Become an ally to the survivor community. So what is it and how do you do it? Well, I love this. This is actually from Survivor Alliance. If you don't know, that is led by survivor leader Ming Dang from the UK. I'm a part of the Survivor Alliance. I love and support all of Ming's work. And I love this. The ally continuum really kind of lays out the steps of which you can be an ally. So let's go through them. So 1, enacting oppression on others. So obviously this is at the very end of the continuum. We don't ever want to do that. 2, passive acceptance of oppression. So maybe we're not oppressing people, but we're also not kind of doing anything about it. 3, staying silent as a bystander. So you see something, but you don't say something. 4, stopping oppressive behaviors within self and others. So that's kind of when we see that change, right? The click, where you start to recognize the oppressive behaviors that maybe you've been exhibiting that you didn't know before. And now you're making a conscious effort to stop them. 5, self-initiated learning, right? So when you take that initiative, you start doing the work, you start researching how to be an ally. 6, raising issue with others. You're speaking up now. Now you're talking about it. 7, nudging others to take action. So now it's more than words. Now you want action. You want results. You want change. And 8, being proactive to change society. So you're not waiting. You're going to be proactive. You're going to think of ways in which you can change within your home, within your community, within your place of work, in which you can be an ally. Okay, let's have a question. Where do you fall on the ally continuum? So the chat box is open. So hold on, I'm going to go back so you guys can all see it. Where do you fall? And let's be honest, because this is a learning exercise. So myself, I consider myself an ally. I'm an ally as a survivor. I'm an ally to other survivors because I'm a survivor that has a position of power and some privilege. And I recognize that. So it's my responsibility to uplift and amplify other survivors in my community. So I also am learning how to be a better ally. And I would say I'm number 6, 7. Okay. So I'm going to look in the chat box and see if anyone responded. Oh my God, I got a lot of 6s and 7s. Yeah, okay. I don't think anyone's going to put 1. Oh, someone said you're a 10. Oh my God, thanks. Okay. I see a lot of 6s and 7s. Okay. Self-initiated learning. I really like that. That's really good, Colleen. Yeah. 5 and 6. Okay. Ooh, 8. I got some 8s in here. You guys rock. Okay. All right. I think I can say, I think majority of us, right? We'd say we're probably within the 5, 6, 7 range, and a couple of us are 8. So we're doing the learning, and it's important to do that. The Survivor Alliance has an allies toolkit. It's a PDF document. I will share it with everybody. If you work in the anti-trafficking space, you need to have this document. It provides lots of tools, how to engage with the community, how to amplify voices. So I will providing that afterwards as just materials for you guys and resources moving forward. All right. Hey, what's going on? All right. The things not moving forward. Okay, hold on. Okay, yeah, there it is. Okay, so empowering beliefs and behaviors. We talked about allyship and being an ally to survivors, but it's also about the beliefs and behaviors in that which we have that also can help empower survivors. So empower survivors to seek justice for their own lives. Again, don't do for others, let them do for themselves, but give them the tools that they can do that. Show them how, that's okay. Enable survivors and their community to take responsibility for one another. Build that community, right? Build the community of survivor leaders. Understand survivors' behaviors may be responses to their trauma. I mean, if you're not doing trauma-informed work, then you definitely should be, and you should be training, and all your staff should be trained to provide trauma-informed work. Expect survivors to make mistakes and to repair these mistakes. I mean, life is about making mistakes. I make 101 mistakes every single day, but it's okay. I'm learning every single day. I'm learning something new, but I wouldn't learn if I always had somebody there to fix my problems for me. So, and look for their story and bravery and resilience. Oh my God, everyone has a story. We all have a story. but we also have a story of resilience, of inspiration, of motivation, of courage. Let's focus on that story and not the story of trauma. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be talking about what trafficking looks like. I'm not talking about sugarcoating it, because trafficking is violent, it's painful, it's horrific. And I'm not saying to shy away from that. But there's a way to tell a story in which you lead with resilience or you lead with trauma. And I think we should be leading with the resilience piece. So this is how we can empower survivors of trafficking, some tools. But now we want to move into something new, survivor leadership, because that's what this is about. We want survivors to be leaders, leaders in their families, leaders in their communities, leaders in their any space that they work in the anti-trafficking movement or in their professional career, but building leadership within survivors of trafficking. Okay. So what is survivor leadership? So it places survivors of human trafficking at the forefront of the anti-trafficking movement. But to do this, survivors need to build those leadership skills, right? So they need to be able to build the skills and tools to be leaders, decision-making. They need to have the relevant skills, and which can be achieved through survivor leadership programming and training. So survivor leadership training really focuses on building the leadership skills, the employable skills, communication skills, all the things that would make somebody a really powerful and impressive leader. And it's about creating leadership opportunities. So there's so many different ways in which we can provide opportunities for survivors of trafficking. So I'm going to go through a few. Boards and advisory committees. So these can be paid and volunteer. I've sat on both paid and volunteer advisory committees. But the key to this, the absolute key to this, is that you're not inviting somebody to come and sit on a board or an advisory committee just to sit there and be quiet. You're inviting them because you want to hear their expertise. You want their opinion. And they should be in a decision-making role. So you don't invite somebody when all the decisions have been made and just say, hey, thanks for coming. No, they should be invited through the entire process. Research. There's an ample amount of research happening right now in the anti-trafficking movement. So why are we not engaging survivors more in this? Whether it's focus group participation, co-authorship, if you're writing a paper, if you're doing research, why not engage with a survivor that maybe that you work with who's also interested in developing and enhancing their research skills? Program evaluation. Program evaluation, all programs should be evaluated to see their effectiveness and their efficiency, but that's a tool that survivors can also develop. Help them gain those skills. Consulting. So many opportunities for survivors to engage in consulting. And again, consulting is always paid work. It's not free. So program design. Maybe you're designing a program in your organization and you want to have some insight from a survivor. Curriculum creation, policy review. But again, these should be, if you're engaging with a survivor, from the very beginning, from inception, not at the very end, just to have someone look through something and checkbox. Have them involved at every stage, because, you know, this is the thing. We're not doing this because it's nice to do. I'm not saying doing this because it'll make you feel better. I'm saying doing it because your program will be better. I can tell you that. I know that for a fact. If you engage with survivors of trafficking when you're building your programs, I almost guarantee your program's going to be better, because you have people that understand what they need. What are the services? They can tell you some of the things that you might miss or things that you might overlook. So it's in your best interest to engage with survivors throughout all stages of development. And then professional employment. So maybe this also really works for the private sector, because I know all the time the private sector feels like they don't have a place in this, but they do. Paid internships. There's so many different roles a survivor can have, and it's not always within the anti-trafficking space. Or maybe it is, but in a different capacity. Maybe they want to work in HR. Maybe they want to work in finance. Maybe they want to work in operations. Paid internships are a great way to gain experience and learn about a different area within an organization. Job mentorship. Maybe you can't set up an internship program, but you can mentor somebody, particularly if they show an interest in a specific area. Maybe they really, really want to learn about, I don't know, marketing, design, something, public relations. Mentor them, show them, right? Help them develop those skills. And micro grants. So if you're going for funding, federal funding, provincial funding, or funding from the government or from the city here, include within your grant a micro grant that's specifically for a survivor of trafficking. Maybe they can use that to put on a one-day training or a workshop or something, or maybe they have an idea for some sort of campaign, right? You give them the money, allow them to create and run from the very beginning their own project. I mean, I don't think I can think of anything more empowering and building on leadership than to give somebody and have the belief in somebody that they can do something like that. So again, I know not all of these things are, everybody's going to do all of them, but I think we all within our roles can do something into creating leadership opportunities. So I have another question. How can you create leadership opportunities for survivors? Okay, I'm going to go back, open up the questions. So within your work, within your role, are there ways that you can do this? Are there things that you can do to create opportunities? Think about it. Do you have a board? Do you have an advisory committee? Is it something that you could bring somebody on? Are you working on research right now? Something where you can engage a survivor to help you and be a co-author? Are you putting together a program and you would benefit from having a survivor consultant? Or do you think you maybe could mentor somebody within your organization that's a survivor? Perhaps they're a client, but they've shown a keen interest in a certain area. Okay, let's see. I know it's a hard question. I'm putting you guys on the spot, but make them safeguarding leads. Okay. We have a mentee mentor program for Francophone women. Oh, okay. So some of you guys are already doing this. So that's like amazing. Okay. Okay. So some of you are doing it. So there's different ways. And again, I'm not saying this is stuff that's supposed to happen overnight. Survivors of domestic violence. Yes, we have survivors on our team at all levels. I love that. I love that. I love that. Oh my God, Jen, I love it. Okay. That's important at all levels. Jen just said that. So it's not just about entry level. When we're working with survivors, we're engaging with survivors, they should be at all levels. We should have entry level, we should have mid-level, and we should have in leadership positions. Not saying that's going to happen overnight, but the whole point is you should be mentoring people to be able to grow into those positions. So, I mean, you guys are already doing amazing work. So if there's anything else. I think someone's saying, oh, so Cindy, yes. So about parents, the role of parents, yeah. I think everyone's doing, and it is true, engaging parents, engaging the community. We know any work, even when we're talking about survivors, engaging parents and supporting, because your support network is really key to your success. So if we have parents that are engaged and want to be supportive, 100% we should be able to include them and help them. They're going to be able to help that survivor build on their own leadership and empowerment skills too. Okay. I feel like every time I go to the chat and I come back, something happens. Let me see. Oh. Okay, hold on. No, hold on. I'm going to go back. Oh God. Ah, okay. Okay. So those are ways in which we can engage with survivors of human trafficking and create opportunities, right? Really about leadership opportunities. So as I said in the very beginning, and I taught in my bio, I am the founder and executive director of Project iRISE. So let's talk a little bit about Project iRISE and what we're doing. So we are a survivor-led, community-based, not-for-profit organization. We have a mission to educate and empower survivors of human trafficking and those at risk. So this is just a picture of my incredible team. This was when we did a GoFundMe last fall to raise money for removal, branding tattoo removal for survivors of trafficking. And we were so blessed. We were able to raise almost $12,000 from the community. This really was community coming together and supporting. I have an amazing, diverse group of just women, part of this team helping make Project iRISE what it is. If you want any more information about Project iRISE, please visit our website, follow us on social media, and of course, you can send us an email. So Project iRISE is developing a leadership program. So we are developing a survivor leadership program. So just an overview of what that is. A program is designed to help survivors of sex trafficking regain their self-esteem, enhance their leadership skills, and rebuild their lives. The program is entirely designed, implemented, and evaluated by survivors of human trafficking and led by a survivor-run team. And the design of the leadership program includes insights of 15 different survivors of trafficking. So myself, I'm a survivor, our research assistant, our peer support worker, we are all survivors working together. We have support from community members, but it's us leading this project. As well, we have hired 2 survivor consultants to sit in our working group to provide further insight into the design of our program and also the execution. We're also running a focus group next week where we'll be engaging with 10 survivors of human trafficking to help us in designing our modules. And this was really important to me because I said before, when we're working in this community, a diversity of experiences and a diversity of identities is so important. We have to move away from that one single narrative and really engage with people of all different backgrounds and all different experiences, because that's how we are able to create programming that touches everybody, that's accessible and really connects to a larger group of people. So this is what we're doing. So a little bit more about our survivor leadership program. So we have different outcomes that we have to report to the ministry, but on top of that, we want to do our own evaluation of the program. And so typically when you do an evaluation, you have an external evaluator come in. We're doing a little bit more participatory. So we have an evaluator who we're working with, and myself and the team are actually creating this evaluation framework. So just looking at our logic model, I know it's really small, so you probably can't see it. So I just want to focus on the outcome. So this is the impact that we're really hoping to achieve through our program. And that is immediate outcome is reduce isolation, increased awareness of available services for mental health, increased awareness of available resources for safety, and increased knowledge of vocational skills and development for employment. Our intermediate outcomes that we're looking for are increased skills for employment, reduction in survivor participants facing poverty, and improved employment networks. And our long-term outcomes are reduced re-victimization, reduced access to government services, improved employability, increased empowerment, improved vocational skills, improved leadership skills, and improved self-esteem. So this is what we're hoping to do. And we want to create this evaluation framework as something that can be scalable, as something that can be used and implemented across various jurisdictions. So this is really our goal, is what can we do to create a survivor leadership training module that can be shared and can be used. And that's really the goal of what we're trying to do. So a little bit of our program. So our leadership program is 1 year consisting of 10 modules. We have guest speakers, we have industry professionals coming in from a variety of different areas. So within anti-trafficking, but also outside of anti-trafficking, because like I said before, not everybody wants to work in the anti-trafficking space. Upon completion, they'll have a survivor leadership certification. So all our participants will be certified. They also have a Respect in the Workplace certification. So Respect in the Workplace is one of our community partners that has offered a free training for all our participants and for them to become certified. This is really important because this is another added piece that they can add onto their resume. And as we know, for people who have been working in the life, in the game, they don't have a professional resume. And it's really hard to go for a job interview if you have 4 or 5 years, there's nothing you can put in there. So we want to help make sure that their employment opportunities are increased. And we also will be providing a professional reference. So again, this is something that becomes somewhat of a barrier when you're trying to enter into the professional workplace. You don't have a professional reference. So we will be providing that for all our participants. Upon completion of the 1 year training, we will have a town hall. So it's our 1 day town hall to educate and inform community and stakeholders. So all of you. And each survivor in our program will present from her unique subject matter expertise. This is really important because everyone is different. Everyone has different intersecting identities, experiences, and to be able to speak to what they know. For instance, in my lived experience, there was homelessness. There was involvement in the youth shelter system, but that's not everyone's experience. I did not experience substance abuse issues, so I cannot speak to that. We all have our own unique expertise along as with being a survivor. And so this is an opportunity for all our participants to share from their lens, providing information to the community, prevention, rehabilitation, prosecution, and how we can best support those efforts. And an opportunity to connect and network, because I think that's one of the most important things that I recognize in my life was building a network. And that can be very hard, particularly if you're very isolated, you're alone, you don't know people, and maybe you don't even trust people fully. So being able to create that network of people that you know and just build on that is really, really huge. And that also helps isolation. Okay. So our modules. So based on our early research we've done through an environmental scan and through our literature review, these are some of the key themes that we saw. We will also be running, I said, the focus groups. And so again, that will really help inform what the final modules will be. But this is just very kind of early what we're thinking of. So public speaking, ethical storytelling, financial literacy and career counseling, self-care, healthy communication and relationships, and then policy advocacy and community organizing. So those were some of the themes that kept coming up within our research, but we have not finalized what the modules will consist of. Okay, so we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we think, in the anti-trafficking space, what have we done really effectively? Well, we've taken care of basic needs, right? We've been able to provide shelter and food and those basic needs for survivors. We've moved on to security, right? We've been really, really good and really effective at being able to prosecute, at being able to take these cases and provide security for survivors. We've helped build intimate relationships, friends, belonging, networks, peer support, all those things. And we're really moving towards esteem, right? So we're helping build that feeling of belonging, that feeling of accomplishment, the feeling of achieving something. But the one area that we have not been effective at is self-actualization. And that is where Project iRISE focuses. Our focus really is to be able to tap into everyone's full potential, because every single survivor has so much to offer, so much I can't even tell you, because I know I meet these women all the time, but oftentimes it's overlooked. Oftentimes people just don't see it because they just see a survivor and that's it. But that survivor is a teacher. She's a graphic artist. She's a doctor. I mean, she could be the next prime minister. Anything is possible. And this is really what we want to focus on, is really tapping in and achieving one's full potential. And so what does that look like when you're able to do that? What does it look like when you can really tap into someone's full potential? So, oh, okay, sorry. My slides switched over, but that's okay. So recommendations. So recommendations, because again, the whole point of this is to provide you guys with knowledge, something to take home, right? So recommendations, storytelling. If you're working with people and you're asking them to share their story, why are you asking them to share their story and how are you doing it? And if you're not doing it in a way in which they're the protagonist, if you're not doing it in a way in which they are empowered, then why are you doing it? Really, why are you sharing that story? What is really the purpose? Who benefits from that story being told? Allyship. It's about being proactive, not reactive, right? And I mean, I think it already so you guys are all sort of really doing well in the ally continuum, but we can all do better. Myself included, we can all be more proactive as far as being allies, creating opportunities for survivors and amplifying their voices. And leadership, support the development of employable skills, community building. So really go beyond inclusion. Let's build leaders. We can do it. It's absolutely possible we can do it, but we got to do it together. We have to support each other and we have to support this community. Okay. So this was the quote. Sorry, my order was messed up. So I was talking about that self-actualization, that someone believing their full potential. So I have a survivor, I won't share her name, but I've been mentoring her for about 2 years and she's worked with Project iRISE. So she provided me, I told her I was doing this presentation. So she's like, okay, I want to say something. So she provided me with this quote, so I'll read it to you. Project iRISE has helped me change my life around in such a positive way, professionally and personally. Being a Métis survivor of human trafficking, I thought my career options would be very limited. After receiving mentorship from Project iRISE, I noticed my negative talk was decreasing and I began to believe in myself again. Project iRISE connected me with an incredible opportunity to obtain a paid part-time job providing consulting on game design projects. After receiving and accepting this job offer, my self-esteem has skyrocketed and I'm super excited to see what the future holds. That's why we do this, right? This is why we're doing this, because this is the result that we want. This young woman, I met her, she was in her bachelor's doing her undergrad and did not have the confidence, was second guessing herself, but I could see her potential. She couldn't see it yet, but I could see it. And through our mentorship, through our friendship, she began to see it. I'll tell you now, she's graduating with her bachelor's child youth worker. She has a full-time job already lined up. Now she's doing part-time survivor consulting in game design, which is what she loves because she's very creative. And I mean, like I told her, I'm going to be working for you one day. That's so awesome she is. But it did. She changed. That self-belief changed. It clicked and it changed. She is now powered. She's a leader. So it can be done. Just we need to provide people with the tools and the supports. So guys, I'm wrapping up. So you can stay in touch with me. So you can email me directly, rbruderprojectirise.org, particularly if you want to learn more about our survivor leadership program. It will be starting in September 2021, and the referral process will be starting next month. So if you're interested, if you know a survivor you think would benefit from leadership training, or you are a survivor on this call and you would benefit from this, please reach out, email us. We will be starting the referral process. I'm on social media, so you can follow me on social media. Okay, so thank you. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Wow, incredible. Thank you so much, Rhonelle. I was messaging with my colleague Varka, and I was like, I just want to like keep saying yes, 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 yes. Fantastic. I loved how you like coordinated the really practical pieces and the difference that can be made. I'm seeing a lot of love for you right now in our comments here. We do have 10 minutes for Q&A. So folks, you can, if you've got questions for Rhonelle, you can throw them in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function, and I can unmute you so you can ask yourself, but do keep in mind that we're being recorded. So if you'd rather not be recorded, just put it in the chat box.
And yes, and if anyone has any just like questions or want to learn more about survivor leadership, please reach out to me. I will share, Leah, I'll share with you the Survivor Alliance Toolkit. So you guys can each have a copy of that, because like I said, that's very, very informative.
Great. Yeah, we'll send that out by email to all of the folks who are on here today.
If anyone has any questions?
Any other questions?
Oh, I saw something that said, what about male survivors? That's a very good question. So Project iRISE, we work with female identifying persons. So that's our community we work with. But I will say that there is definitely a gap within supports for male survivors of trafficking. When I was creating Project iRISE, I just felt personally that was not my space. You know what I mean? Sometimes you have to stay in your lane. And I felt that working with female identifying persons was a place that I felt comfortable and I felt I could do the best work. But I do recognize that there is not enough services for male survivors. So.
What sort of expectations would you be looking for in accepting a survivor to your leadership project?
Yes. So some of the basic, I think, sort of requirements we're looking at is someone who has been out of, sort of the trafficking for at least 2 years. That's really important for us because we really want to make sure everyone can really benefit from this program. We want to make sure that they have some, maybe some work experience, maybe some school. It doesn't have to be, university. Maybe you took a couple courses, but some experience. We also want to make sure that they have a support network. So we're a very small organization. We do have a crisis counselor who is supporting all our work. She's going to be coming to our focus groups. She's probably on here, I don't know. She's amazing too, Nikki. But she's also going to be supporting our leadership training. But we're not able to provide that really wraparound care services. So we do need to ensure that everybody is connected with an agency, an advocate, just somebody in the community. And the age is 18 plus. So there's no age limit. And the reason why we did that was because, I had so many survivors reach out to me who were in their 30s, in their 40s, and they said, there's no support for us for now. Everything stops at 29 or 25. It's all youth, and I understand because, there's a reason why we focus on the youth, but the reality is there's a lot of survivors who are plus 30, plus 35, who have never had any support, any services, and have a lot to offer the community.
All right, we've got a few more questions coming in. Joe was wondering if you could clarify a little more about what reduced access to government services means in your evaluation framework.
Yeah, so really what we're looking for is the leadership program. One of our main focus is really reducing poverty. So removing survivors from poverty and building employable skills. So it's survivors who are reliant upon, government, financial assistance programming, things like that. Our hope is, and then again, that's a very long-term goal. If you saw long-term outcome was that through this training, through the leadership, through them developing employable skills, they will be able to remove themselves from poverty, but also less reliance on government services, financial services.
Some survivors are not in the headspace to admit that they are survivors. How can we look for services for them and get them to participate?
Oh, no, exactly. So, I mean, we know that, and anyone who knows who works with survivors know that there's a lot of work. There's a lot of internal work that needs to be done, and there are services that provide really that acute care, that crisis work. And I think it's really about it's mental health. It's getting the psychological, the therapy, those things and it takes a long time. This is not an overnight process. The survivor leadership work that we're talking about would be for someone who is a little bit further along in their journey. So not to say we're, trying to exclude people, but we just recognize that you have to do that work, that internal work first. Before you can kind of go out there and help other people, you got to take care of you first. That's number one. So we want everyone to take care of themselves first. And then when they're ready, when they feel like they're healed enough to go back and be a leader in their community, then absolutely, then they should have the opportunities to do so.
Something that also comes to mind for me, Rhonelle, is your programs and services are for people who are at that point in their journey. For folks who are elsewhere on a journey, the importance of non-discrimination and, not saying like whether you identify as a survivor or not, if you're just looking for any kinds of supports, resources, here they are. Right? However it is you identify, if this, you can access our programs without having to check off all of the boxes that you're here.
And even Leah, in our program, we recognize that there are people who are survivors who are further along in their journey, but still might engage in sex work for survival purposes, or maybe they haven't, and then all of a sudden something happens and they feel, and I don't know, so we're also very, I think, open-minded and understanding to the fact that it's not just. Life doesn't just work in one way. You don't just leave and then everything's perfect and you move forward. Life is difficult. It's challenging. Things happen. So we're there to support people who are and want to be survivors, and we want to help them. But we also recognize that you might take that step back, and that's okay. And we still want to support you.
Yeah. We've got a couple more questions here. What do you feel about the lack of emergency housing for trafficked women and girls, and how that affects them leaving their trafficker?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about sort of those basic needs. Housing is a basic need. If you don't have secure and safe housing, then you're relying on your trafficker for those basic needs. And so, and I think I've heard many other survivors say this. It's almost unfair. It's cruel to tell someone to leave their trafficker and not be able to provide with them all those basic needs that they have. I think there are a few. I know here, I'm based in Toronto, there are a few transitional homes, safe homes for survivors of trafficking, but by all means, that's not enough. And as far as even sort of more long-term sort of housing, subsidized or low-income housing, there needs to be more. I don't think we have enough here. So,
never enough. Are you aware of any leadership programs for very young survivors, tweens and teens?
I'm not aware. Not to say it doesn't exist, but when we did sort of our environmental scan of leadership training, we found another one. So Voice found in Ottawa, they have a survivor leadership training. I don't know the age requirements, but you could look to see, maybe they take younger survivors. But other than that, we really didn't find that much.
Another gap, yet another place where we need more funding, more services. Can you explain more about the distinction between being a savior versus being a support, empowering a survivor versus disempowering survivors?
Yes. When you're saving someone, I was saying this before, it's coming in and wanting to do everything, so it's, okay, I'm going to have this map, this plan for you. I'm going to help you this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And that's great, right? It's great to provide the services and the support, but this has to be led by the survivor. It's their life. And that's the thing, because oftentimes someone will just agree to things because they want to appease you, or because you're in an imbalance of a power dynamic. So maybe they feel that they have to, if they're going to still be able to maintain, support from your agency. So instead of trying to save somebody and say, okay, this is the vision I have for your life here, and you're telling them basically what your idea is for them, it's saying, what do you want? What do you need? I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you, but also respecting the choices that they make. And if they make a choice you don't agree with, you have to respect that. Even if oh my God, why is she doing that? It's going to not, that's okay. Because that's life. We learn when we make mistakes. They have to be allowed to make mistakes and learn. And I mean, even though that's hard because you don't want to see someone go down a path or do something you don't agree with, but if you're constantly there, if you're constantly saving them, they're never going to learn to be independent. And like I said before, a survivor is not going to stay at your agency forever. There's a time limit for most agency supports. So they need to develop those skills, those resiliency skills, those independence skills to live on their life for the rest of their life, to live on their own. So
what I'm hearing you saying over and over again is like just being there for them, like not passing judgment, not making decisions for them, being a support no matter what.
Yes, that people have to make the decisions within their life. Again, sometimes we don't necessarily agree with them, but we still should be there to support them.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So we are at the 3 o'clock mark now. We have put Rhonelle's info, she shared it on the slides, and we've dropped it in the chat as well. We'll be sending you out the information that Rhonelle is sharing, all of the resources. So just wanted to say thank you so much once again. You had so many wonderful things to share with us. I know that I'll be pondering and replaying your words in my head for a while of how can I do a better job and be a better ally. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who joined us today for taking the time to come and listen as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye everyone.